Hello everyone, and today we're going to start this week's topic, which is going to be talking about function notation. Now, we'll talk about some of the vocabulary, specifically function, but just as a reminder, function notation is things that look like this. If you remember from previous lessons, we know that f of x is just the same as y. So you've seen this a little bit already, which will hopefully help here. If you haven't, please take a moment to pause this video and either print out the guided notes that are there for you or set this up in your own notebook so you can follow along with us. You can pause and rewind at any point, and if turning on the subtitles in the closed captioning is helpful to you, please take an opportunity to do that. So let's get started. So, as a reminder, function is an equation that relates two variables whose graph passes the vertical line test. And in function notation, one of the variables is represented by this, which looks, is the same as another variable. So x is one variable in this case, and then f of x is the whole other variable. And that's how we say this. We call this f of x, meaning that f is the name of a function. So you could have f is the most common, but g or any other variable could happen. It's f is a function of the variable x. And we can use it for a lot of different things. The nice thing is that it's a way to do shorthand. So if you see, given the following functions, and it says f of -2, and then it gives you a function f of x, what this means is that use the function f and with the number equal to -2. So I gave you a couple functions to practice on. Here's the first one. F of x is equal to 3x plus 7. So the idea here is we want to know f of -2. So what that tells us is that x is going to be -2. As you can see, they're in the same positions, right like this. And if we change x on one side to -2, we have to follow the golden rule. We have to change it on the other. So that just means that now it's -2 squared plus 7. This is all it means. It's a very weird looking notation the first time you see it, but all this means is plug -2 into the function named f. And from there, it's just an evaluate problem. So remember that you want to follow your order of operations. So we're going to do our exponents first. -2 squared is +4, because the two negatives cancel out, plus 7. Then our multiplication, 12 plus 7. And lastly, our addition, 19. So all we've done here is we've plugged in our x value and gone down the operations. The other side, you'll notice we didn't change. It's still f of -2, which is good because this is the thing that we actually want, right? This is what has been asked of us to find. So we don't want to change anything on this side. We want this. So when we reach the end, we've got that on one side and equals 19. Now, the one thing that students will definitely struggle with that I see every year is this is not multiplication. I know it looks like multiplication, but it's not. I know that sounds like it looks like it. That's okay, it does. I recognize that. You're not wrong. It's not multiplication. We don't divide anything here because look, this is how we want our final answer to look. And that's what we have on this side. That's what we want. So we're not going to mess with the thing that we want. We're just going to change this side and work our way down. All right. So again, I know it's a little bit of odd notation first off, but you're going to see it for the rest of your mathematical career. So let's take this opportunity to practice this right now. So another way that you're going to see this is you might see there's plenty of other functions that you could possibly write. One thing that's really important here is we've got our square root, we've got a negative x, and we have negatives here. So one note I always like to give students is that when you plug in, because remember this is what this means, when you plug in -2, always use parentheses. And so the nice thing with something like a square root is that if you forgot the parentheses, you'd realize pretty quickly. So let's substitute that in. F of -2 equals square root 14 minus, and I'm going to add my parentheses, -2. And the reason why that's so important, especially in a problem like this, is we've got then this becomes 14 plus 2. And then we add those together, we get the square root of 16. And if we drop that negative, we wouldn't get this nice square root. So while we all have seen problems where they don't work out quite as nicely as we'd want with square roots, I'm not going to do that to you right away. And so then we just get the integer answer of 4. The f of -2 stayed the same. Again, notice how we didn't do anything over here. We just carried it all the way right down because that's what we want at the end. And so our final answer for this different function is +4. So we're going to keep increasing the challenge of our functions. Here we have these vertical lines, which if you remember correctly, means that this is the absolute value, which is the distance of a number from 0. And the main thing is that it just always turns everything positive. So here, our next function, as I said, it was becoming more complicated. And one thing that's important to note here is that x shows up 2 times in the function. And so then when we replace it with the -2, and just want to remind, I made up the -2. This problem could be asked of any number, 7, 36, -1/2. I just picked -2 because it works out as a good practice. When we substitute that in, we want to change it in all the places it shows up. So we end up with our f of -2, and then we also want to be changing this x and this x. So however many times x shows up, that's the number of times you have to change it. And I'm going to make sure I'm including my parentheses in the numerator over -2 in the denominator. So these are where we replaced our 2 x values. Once we've done our substitution, though, it still follows the same path. We're just following our order of operations. 6 minus 3 times -2 becomes minus -6 over -2, which becomes the absolute value of 12 over -2, which becomes the absolute value of -6. And as we discussed, absolute values, main purpose in math is to turn everything positive. And so we end up with +6 at the end. Again, all our math on this side, and then f of -2 isn't changing. So that's how to use function notation when it has the number filled in. Here we have another function where it doesn't have the number filled in here. It says it's equal. This is still substitution. We're going to say, okay, well, every time you see g of x, we're going to set that equal to 0. Versus back here, where we saw x, and we replaced it with the -2. Here, we're going to replace the whole thing because that's what our equation says. So if I look over here, I only see the term g of x one time. So I see it right here. So I'm going to replace that whole thing with 0, and I'm not going to do it on this side because there isn't a g of x term on this side. If it helps to think about it, remember that this function notation is the same as y. So if we rewrite it with just the y terms, I think it becomes a little bit easier to see, oh, we're just going to set this whole thing equal to 0, and we end up with solving the equation 0 is equal to 2x squared minus 1/2. So if you're stuck on a problem, always take, if you want to, rewrite it as y instead of g of x or f of x or whatever the function is. And I think that that'll be very helpful. So now we just have, you'll notice that this is a solve problem because we want to find x. So that just means solve for x. In this case, I'm going to add 1/2 to both sides. And then I'm going to divide by 2. When I divide a fraction by 2, I'm going to call that multiplying by 1/2, which leaves me with 1/4 is equal to x squared. Take the square root of both sides. Now remember, if you've got a squared, what should we all have in the answer? Plus or minus, right? 2 as the exponent means we're going to have 2 answers. So we end up with plus or minus the square root of 1/4, which is 1/2 is equal to x. So if you want to download the homework, you can print it if you'd like, but please do your homework for this, that worksheet, in your homework notebook. And I will be on Zoom and Google Classroom answering any questions that you have.